talk about openings, and that's why I just yelled at you. And welcome to episode 4 of 10 Things I Hate About Your Writing. I don't really hate your writing. Fuck, I probably don't even know your writing. But I know a lot of things that are keeping you from selling books to publishers or to humans. And today, we're going to talk about one of the most important things for newer writers. Also, one of the most important things for indie writers and small press writers. If you've watched the other videos in this series, you'll remember me talking about reader equity. This is going to harken back to that a little bit, and it's going to be with specific examples. But the primary focus of today's episode is talking about strong openings, or the lack thereof. Because let's face it, if your book doesn't open strong, the reader isn't going to make it past the first page. Part of this is a time thing. Actually, it's two time things. It's the amount of time that a slush reader has to focus on your story out of the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of submissions that editor or assistant or agent or intern gets in a week, month, year. And the other is the time in which we live. You are a product of today. Today being October 4th, 2019. I know that's not when you're watching it. For one thing, there's only 14 minutes left in October 4th. I won't be finished recording this video in 14 minutes, and it's going to take a long time to upload because, y'all, internet in Charlotte, North Carolina is not what it should be because Google Fiber doesn't come to my house yet. But we are a product of our time, and your fiction has to be a product of the time as well. So let's back up and rewind a little. Start with a normal intro. I'm John Hartness, and I am a fantasy author, a podcaster, an editor, a small press publisher, and apparently a YouTuber. I write books for a living. I publish books for a living. I am one of the people that you want to sell books to. All those books on the shelves behind me, most of those are books that I publish. The other ones are books that I wrote. In the top, I don't know, over there corner of the screen, those are the Black Knight Chronicles, which I wrote and didn't publish. Everything else you can see is a product of Falstaff Books, which is the press that I run. With plenty of help, but yeah, it's my shop. That means that I know what publishers are looking for because I'm a publisher and I'm looking for things. We've published over 150 titles in the last 4 years, so we've moved a few books. All of that is to say that when someone asks you for your first 3 chapters, your first 3 chapters better fucking hook them. It better hook them so hard they can't imagine moving on. For an example, I wrote a book called Fireheart. It's about a teenage girl who runs over a cute boy on her bike as she's riding through the woods to school one morning. Later on in the day, she finds out that boy's a dragon. Then elves show up and shit really gets weird. I didn't start the book there the first time. I originally started the book with her getting ready for school, because that's fucking original. I had her in the bathroom tweezing her eyebrows. I had her worrying that her boobs were too small. I had her arguing with her dad about environmental issues. And on page 3 or 4, I had her going out and riding through the woods, and it was about page 6 when I had her actually run into the cute boy on the bike. That's 6 pages too long. I cut all of that crap and started the story where the story starts. All of that backstory is similar to world building that we talked about in the last video. You don't need to see all of that all in one big chunk right at the beginning. It's like descriptions. You can sprinkle descriptions in and reveal it over time. When I first started doing these videos, you didn't know that I had purple hair. When I first started these videos, I may not have had purple hair. It's all back like this. It looks brown. That's also kind of shitty. Sorry, I'm a Leo, so I'm going to fuck with my hair. But as we have proceeded through these videos, I've revealed more of myself to you. Don't worry, I'm stopping here. I'm not taking off anything else. Not for free. Developing your character is just like that. You don't have to start off, introduce a character, and then immediately write me a paragraph about their hair color, their height, their size, their ethnicity, their clothing, their attitude, all of that. You can just dribble it through. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. It's still important. Do that. The reason why you care about opening strong, even if you have a publishing contract, is because people have to buy your shit. Amazon has this great feature. It's called the free sample. You can download 10% of any ebook and read it for free before you spend a dime. How many books do you think I actually buy after reading the sample? About 1 in 5. I'm telling you that 80% of the books that I pick out because the cover looks awesome, or I've heard of this author, somebody said they were cool, I met them, they seemed nice, 80% of those I don't pull the trigger on purchasing. Probably because at least 60% of them don't start strong. I have a lot of shit to do, y'all. You gotta hook me early. Now, when I'm reading submissions, which, lucky for most of you, I don't do very much anymore because I reject fast and I reject a lot. When I was reading submissions, you had probably 3 paragraphs to hook me, if you're lucky. If we're being real, I once rejected a short story before I got to the first comma. That's not true. I didn't finish the first sentence. I had gotten to the first comma. It was like an 11-word it was like an 11-word dependent clause, then the comma, and I was like, nope, gotta go. You have to start strong. Pacing and hooking a reader are all important things. And when it comes to selling a book, especially for someone with no reader equity, or publisher equity for that matter, if you're trying to sell your book to an agent or a press, you gotta hook me fast. Don't hand me your manuscript, your 100,000-word opus, and tell me, well, the first 3 chapters are a lot of setup, and in chapter 4 is a lot of character development, and then in chapter 5 the story really gets going. Because the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at you and say, then why don't you start the book on chapter 5? And I'm going to hand it back to you and say, start the book on chapter 5 and then let's talk. And most people who know me will say, yeah, I can see him doing that. I may actually have done that. It sounds real familiar. I don't know. Whatever. Start your book at the beginning. En media res, which is probably mispronounced, is a really good place to start. In the middle of the action. Standing over a dead body. That's a pretty good place to start. Riding through the woods and crashing into a boy. Pretty good place to start. I started a Harker book with him saying, most people don't meet their guardian angel staring at a corpse in the rainstorm. That's a pretty good hook. The very first line of the very first Harker book is, I fucking hate demons. I don't tell you shit about the world, but you know he hates demons and you know he's going to say naughty words. So the table is set. In multiple of the first Bubba short stories, I would start each story with, I hate cemeteries. Well, cemeteries is where the zombies are, Bubba. Or, man, I hate chupacabras. Well, at least you ain't calling them chalupas anymore. It would always be, I hate something, which was going to be important to the story, and then Skeeter telling Bubba why he had to deal with the aforementioned something. So that was a trope that I built in the first half dozen or so Bubba stories. I don't use it so much anymore. Maybe I'll drag it back out for season 5 now that I'm thinking about it. When we rewrote and recreated the Black Knight Chronicles, Deb, the publisher for Bellbridge, thought that the opening for book 2 was a little soft. And since I was an unknown writer and didn't have much in the way of reader equity, she said, let's punch this up a little. Let's let people know that we're starting with some horror comedy. So she said, a cop and a vampire walk into a bar. I wish that was the beginning of a joke, but it wasn't. That was great. I remember that because that's a good opening. The opener to the whole series was, I hate waking up in unfamiliar places. And since I've slept in the same place for most of the last couple of decades, pretty much any place is unfamiliar. And then I go on to talk about being tied to a chair and all of that. But that's a solid open. You got to hook people. If your opening doesn't grab them, they're not going to get to the meat. You don't have to immediately rush into the story. You don't have to start in the middle of the action. You can start with a flashback. It's harder to do in books than it is in TV shows, but we've all seen that episode of that TV show where you start and the action is going, and somebody's about to die, and holy shit, how did we get here? Cut, credits, title screen, 3 days earlier. I hate it because it drives me nuts at this point, because I know that by the time we get to season 3, we're going to have one of those in any show. And then eventually we're going to have the goddamn musical episode, and we're going to have the goddamn Groundhog Day episode. But anyway, that's another strong start. You need to get to the meat of your book quickly, especially if you don't have any reader or publisher equity. If you're published by a major traditional press, you automatically have a little bit of reader or publisher equity because they bought your book in a bookstore, or they're a reviewer for Kirkus, or they're a librarian and the book was reviewed in Library Journal. These automatically get you a level of reader equity that self-published and small press authors don't get. So deal with it. It just don't happen. But even if you're working with Tor or Bain or Del Rey or who the hell ever, you still don't have much more than a couple of chapters. Or you're going to get a big DNF, a did not finish. You have to hook people. You have to make them want to turn the page. You have to start your book in the right place. Now, I said that this was a matter of time in 2 ways. One of those is that the person reading your submission has a very limited amount of time to devote to each book that comes across their desk. If an agent sends it, you get a little more time. If it's someone who's got a lengthy publishing history, you get a little more time. If you bought the publisher a whole lot of alcohol at a convention, you get a little more time, let's be real. But if you're a complete unknown, just querying, you got a hook. You got to have a gimmick. I don't know any of the rest of the words to that song, but you got to have a gimmick. It makes sense. The other way in which this is a matter of time is it's a matter of the time in which we live. media has changed, and it has changed rapidly. I was rereading It not long ago, and then I read The Institute. Both of these are by Stephen King. If you haven't heard of him, guy's wrote a couple of books, sold a few. He does okay. Stephen King's first book was published the year I was born, 1973. So Stephen King began writing fiction in the 60s, which meant that the stuff that he grew up reading is from the 50s. So his narrative style goes back 60 or close to 70 years from today. How much has changed in the past 70 years? Well, this is a telephone. The internet exists. People have video cameras in their homes. I have a laser printer. I have a laser sitting behind me. A fat redneck in North Carolina can run a publishing company, for crying out loud. These are changes in our lives. We consume media differently, and there is so much competition for our time that if you're starting your career today, you don't get 3 or 4 chapters to get things rolling. Stephen King does, because he's Stephen effing King. Hell, Jonathan Mayberry gets more time to start off a story than someone starting out now, because he's Jonathan effing Mayberry. And Jonathan hasn't been publishing anywhere near as long as King. He's also really good, and that buys him some equity too. But you don't have that equity. You don't have that time because your book and your career is a product of the early 21st century. You don't get to write like Robert Jordan. You don't get to write like Tolkien. You don't get to write like Pat Rothfuss or Brandon Sanderson. You don't get to write like Jim Butcher. You can try. God knows I try. You can't take the time to build a story and hook a reader that all of these people who have much longer careers than you can do, because you don't have that equity. So you have to start your story in the right place. Not every story has to start with a fight. My book Genesis starts with the 2 kids running down the hallway of their school trying to escape. And then I do back up a little bit to talk about what happened. That's another one where I cut the first 2 chapters of that book because I started the story in the wrong place. Again, I'm bad to write the setup, the travel to school when stuff happens in school. I did it in Genesis, had to cut it. You've got to immediately land with action or character. You can't even really start with setting unless your setting is so interesting that you can hook people with just descriptions of setting. But I highly recommend making sure that your opening scene has action and something unique about your character. What's the hook? Why do I care about these people? You'll see a book over this shoulder, right there where I'm pointing. That's Herald of Day by Nancy Northcott. It is a time travel historical fantasy with a pretty hefty dash of romance. I love this book. It opens strong as shit. It opens with a hanging. And that's action. Killing someone is active. It also opens with the protagonist scared as shit that she's going to be next. Okay, I have character, I have action. I'm in. Over here is A Whisper of Death by Paul Barrett. That one starts with basically a bunch of villagers coming with torches and pitchforks to run the evil necromancer out of his home. Except the necromancer's a good guy. So we've got character, necromancer, misunderstood, good guy, and action, angry mob. We're hooked. We've got those things down on the bottom shelf over here. That starts with a kid getting his ass kicked in school because he's different. Character, action. These are things that will hook readers. If you're out there trying to get an agent or trying to sell your book to a press, you've got to make sure that your book is going to be the one that makes them want to read the rest after they get the first 3 chapters. So you have to have a hook to get them to read all of the 3 chapters. You have to have a hook at the end of every chapter to get them to read the next chapter. And you have to have a hook at the end of chapter 3, at the end of your sample, to get them to want the full manuscript. And then you have to have a hook at the end to make them want to buy the book. But nothing finishes strong without a strong open. So take a look at the book you're trying to sell. And that's what I'm aiming at here, y'all. I'm here to sell books. Filthy lucre. I'm in. This is how I feed my fat ass, how I feed my wife's cute ass, how I feed my cat's fat fuzzy ass. We're not going to discuss whether or not my ass is fuzzy or not. We're going to just leave it at it's fat. This is what I do for a living. It's how I put food on my table, and food is important to me. So are my antidepressants, and that shit ain't free either. So I'm not creating art. I'm creating saleable genre fiction that is commercial in its intent and in its creation. I'm here to sell books. If you're here to sell books, then don't worry about whether or not your book is artistic enough. Because it's never going to be artistic enough for everybody, and it's probably too artistic for some people. Worry about whether or not it's good. And it can't just be good. It's got to be amazing. I've told you all before, we took 1 book a year when we were open for unsolicited submissions from Falstaff. 1 book a year. It does not get much smaller than a publishing house with a lot of contracted employees and 1 part-time employee and 1 schmuck who owns the place. And we took 1 book a year. So make sure that you're opening strong. Because if you don't open strong, nobody's going to know how great you are in chapter 25. And I want you to be great in chapter 25. So look at chapter 1. Make sure it's hooking people in. All right. That's all I've got for right now. If this video series helps you in any way, if you think it's going to help you make some money, please like and subscribe. Those likes and subscriptions really do matter. They do help. We're over 200 subscribers now. That's kind of awesome. Sorry. Itchy. I have to turn the air off to record the videos, so now it's getting hot. Because it's 100 frickin' degrees in October this year. I'm being punished for my sins. But anyway, if you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe. If you want to read my stuff, find me online. I'm easy to find. If you want to throw some bucks my way, there's stuff that's been crawling along through here. I think it's in the show notes. I don't remember. It's boilerplate. But hey, get out there. Make your writing amazing. And don't forget, be good to one another.